Welcome back, everyone. This is the 2013 offseason, and this is the episode where we're going to break down the free agency recap. So we'll go and break down each division and who they received. First up is the NFC West. You can see the Arizona Cardinals bring in one of the top free agent wide receivers, Mike Wallace. Mike Wallace was with the Minnesota Vikings, but he had one season with RG3 and decided to move on. They do bring in a pair of pass rushers. We see Justin Smith and Jared Allen. Both of them are on the older side, so they have some aged defensive ends there. Then they bring in Beanie Wells from the San Diego Chargers. So they have added depth there at running back because they just lost Donald Brown, who was their starting running back. They tried to sign Arian Foster, who hit free agency from their rival, the 49ers, but he decided to go elsewhere. They tried to get Bradley Fletcher at cornerback, could not get him, but they were able to bring in Darius Butler, who was the former Chicago Bears cornerback. Then you look at the 49ers. Now, the 49ers had a smaller free agency. They went for three people, and they got all three. They went for Lee Charles Bentley of the Saints. They went for Dan Copen, and I believe Copen was with the Denver Broncos. He's older center, much older. Yeah, he was with the Denver Broncos. And then Tyler Thigpen. Thigpen was with the Buffalo Bills. He played well the last game of the season, but he hasn't had much playing time. Aside from that, the San Francisco 49ers let Kellen Clemens walk in free agency. He was their backup quarterback to Drew Brees. So really, Tyler Thigpen's just going there to be the backup for Drew Brees. Now the Rams. They went for Richie Incognito at center, but they failed to sign him. They went for DeAndre Levy. I believe Levy was a Chargers linebacker. He's the top linebacker in the league. And he was, yes. Andre Levy and Clint Sessions left the Chargers after they lost in the AFC Championship game. So they are able to pull in tight end Randy McMichael. They're bringing Chris Jenkins. Brett Kern, the punter. They also signed Ryan Mundy, Jason Smith, who was the right tackle for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Smith was drafted by the Rams in real life. However, he was drafted to the Jaguars in my franchise. He didn't work out in real life. He didn't work out in my reality. So now he's a backup right tackle for the Rams. And then Gerald McRath, middle linebacker for the Rams. And the very last team in this NFC West is the Seahawks, who had an underwhelming performance last year. They tried for Jari Evans, who is the best guard in the league that was in free agency. He did not go to Seattle. Neither did Luis Delmas, the free safety, but they're able to bring in Jamarcus Sanford instead. They bring in Willis McGahee to be the backup running back to Marshawn Lynch. So McGahee was with the Falcons last year. He's older. He's regressing. So now he's kind of more of a backup in case Lynch gets hurt. Maybe he can take some carries, but they do need to get some more young legs there. They do have Turbin at running back too. They signed Jason McGee, one of the best fullbacks in free agency. They signed Reggie Wells to be left guard. Colt Anderson was kind of their consolation prize for not getting Luis Delmas. And then they do sign wide receiver Chad Jackson. Next up, we've got the NFC North. And so we start off with the Bears, who do land the top free agent in overall-wise, which is Jari Evans. He's like 90 overall right guard. Many teams were vying for him. They also tried to get Darryl Tapp, who was the best defensive end, or one of the best defensive ends. And they also went for Tamba Hali, the Steelers defensive end that hit the free agent market. But both of them decided not to go with Chicago, so they failed to sign any left end. They do bring in Henry Melton, though. Henry Melton was with the Green Bay Packers for many years, a good run stopper, but they weren't able to bring in some of the better pass rushers. They do bring in Daniel Fells, Chase Kaufman, two tight ends. In my franchise, I've lowered some of the progression because I'm trying to slow that down a bit. So tight ends are very hard to come by, so Chicago's stocking up on tight ends. They also have Justin Forsett, who was with the Buffalo Bills where he was drafted, was with the Baltimore Ravens last year. Now he's into Chicago this year after they lost to Glenn Coffey, who actually was a pretty decent third down back for them. Then they have cornerback Sean Smith. And then, if you're a Bears fan, Jay Cutler. So Cutler is back. And so They do have Jason Campbell, who's going to be their starting quarterback. Jason Campbell got injured heading into the playoffs, that Week 18 game, when they were trying to beat the Packers to win the division. Campbell got hurt, so Mark Sanchez finished out the playoffs, actually beat the Packers in the wild card round, but then lost in the division. So basically, they lost Sanchez, they lost Kyle Orton in free agency this year, and so they needed a backup quarterback, or at least someone that could be maybe fight for the starting position, and that's Jay Cutler. So their QB room right now is Jason Campbell and Jay Cutler. They also bring in Jamar Williams at outside linebacker. Now for the Lions, they bring in a solid guard in Blaylock, right, and then they also bring in Joe Klopfenstein at tight end. Stanley Arnaud, one of the better middle linebackers that were available. They signed wide receiver Kenny Britt. I think that was a good addition for them. And then they go with 2 quarterbacks here because they had Mike Teal and Josh McCown. Now, Josh McCown has gotten so regressively bad that it was just impossible to keep someone like him. And also I tried to bring him back, but he said no to me. And so they signed Drew Stanton, who's kind of been a backup around the league, bouncing around. Then they also signed Bruce Gradkowski, who has also been more of a backup. Their starting quarterback is Ryan Tannehill, so they don't need a starter. They just needed someone to be behind the rookie, or the sophomore now. Then the Packers, they tried for Jari Evans, and so Jari Evans went to the Bears and not the Packers. They went to the playoff team that won. They also signed Cedric Ellis and then Bradley Fletcher. Those were the 2 big free agents for them. Brian Hoyer, who used to be a backup for the Vikings. Then he was a backup. Let's see, where did I have him? I don't think he was with Minnesota the whole time. He might have been Minnesota the whole time. Let me see. Nope. He was with Minnesota the whole time. So the backup for Minnesota goes to be the backup in Green Bay behind Matthew Stafford. Then they signed Frank Zombo, Jason McCourty at cornerback, Greg Zuerlein, the kicker, as well as Jason Jones, the defensive tackle. And then the last team here in this NFC North, the Vikings also tried for Jari Evans. They tried for Brandon Albert, who hit free agency. Couldn't get either of them. They tried for wide receiver Derek Hagan from Pittsburgh, who used to be with the Packers, and he went to Pittsburgh. They lost their wide receiver Mike Wallace, so Hagan was supposed to be the replacement, but he didn't accept the offer. So instead, the Vikings go with left guard Will Beatty, and they had signed Doug Legursky at center. They bring in Glenn Coffey from the Chicago Bears, so they get the backup running back there. They have Harry Douglas instead of Derek Hagan. And they also bring in Paul McQuistion at guard because they need a left guard and a right guard. They bring in a DT, Fili Mola. And then they have Jarius Byrd at strong safety. Byrd never became the superstar he was in real life, but he's still a solid safety, giving them some more options there in their defensive backfield. Next up, we have the NFC South, and we see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers having a tame offseason. They didn't have as much cap space, so we look at Bruce Davis at outside linebacker, Luis Delmas as free safety. There's another team that was going for him, but he ended up choosing Tampa Bay. And then running back Ryan Torain. They did lose James Davis in free agency, which, again, he didn't really do much. He kind of a return man somewhat. But Ryan Torain comes over to the Buccaneers. Then you have the Atlanta Falcons, another team that was really strapped for cap space because they got Peyton Manning, and actually what it was, I had to franchise tag Larry Fitzgerald to keep him, and so all the money went to him. And the Falcons let go of some good players. They lost Willis McGahee, lost Steven Jackson. They're both older running backs, but still gone. Manning's favorite speedy target, Deion Butler, left them, which I was kind of sad about because he had like 97 speed. It was crazy for Peyton Manning, so he's gone now. And so they bring in Rich Ohrnberger, who was the right guard for the Indianapolis Colts when they made the Super Bowl. He also got injured a lot. I don't know how many times he kept going down for an injury. So as a Colts GM, I let him go. But the Falcons bring him in to be a potential starter. And then they signed Jamal Lord, who is like a late pick from many years ago. I love the guy. I think in real life he was like a free safety that never played in the league, but he was a running back I drafted, and he's been in the league for quite some time now. So I'm very proud of him for sticking it out. Then you got the Carolina Panthers bringing in Michael Okwo, who he was with the Eagles, he was with Dallas, so now he becomes a linebacker for the Panthers. They signed center Dan Connolly, and then kicker Martin Gramatica. And they bring in the Bengals' Brody Croyle to back up Joe Flacco. Croyle had many years as a starter, and actually did a pretty good job as a starter with the Detroit Lions. He was at the Bengals last year where they didn't do bad, but they didn't do great. Osweiler ended up getting the last 2 games of the season, so the Bengals let Croyle go because they decided that it was better to stick with Brock Osweiler, and Croyle was more of a kind of a, I forget the term that they call it, when you're a bridge quarterback. He was a bridge quarterback for the Bengals to give Brock Osweiler some chance to develop, and he did. Osweiler was like a mid-60s, and now he's a 70 overall, so he did get better this year. And then the last team that we're going to talk about here in the South is the Saints. They tried for quarterback Mark Sanchez, couldn't get him. They tried for Tavares Jackson, offering a 1-year, $30 million contract because they're going to move on from Tim Tebow. And so they are only able to acquire Byron Leftwich, who is less likely to be a starter for them, but he could be depending on how bad this QB room is. And then you have Deion Butler. So they get Deion Butler from the Falcons. So what once was a valuable target for the Falcons is now a target for the Saints. Then you have Cody Wallace, Mackenzie Bernadou, Tony Hills, all 3 offensive lineman pickups. They do sign John Kuhn, who is with the Colts. They could not bring him back. I think salary was one of the issues. Travis Beckham at tight end, Antoine Barnes, and Chase Blackburn at linebacker. So the Saints get kind of an upgrade there, especially at wide receiver. Even though Deion Butler is not highly rated overall, he played really, really well because of that 97 speed. Then we have the NFC East. I know Commanders is technically alphabetically first, but I haven't changed them since they were the Redskins. So that's why they're last. But we're going to go left to right. So Cowboys bring in Donnell Ellerbe, which was a great addition for them. Ellerbe was with the Green Bay Packers, and then what happened was the Packers signed DeMarcus Ware last year. So they have Von Miller, Sean Merriman, and DeMarcus Ware, and they run a 4-3. And so Sean Merriman moved more to the middle linebacker, so they didn't really need Donnell Ellerbe. So he leaves in free agency, goes to Dallas, giving them a younger middle linebacker prospect because they've been working with like Al Wilson and older Nick Barnett, and now they get someone younger in their prime. Solid contributor for the Cowboys here. They signed Steve Slayton, who was drafted by Cleveland, then went to the Jacksonville Jaguars. So they bring him in to sort of replace Joseph Adai as the backup running back for Adrian Peterson. They tried to sign Mike Wallace, could not get Mike Wallace. They do throw an offer for Derek Hagan from the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they get him. Then Jed Collins and Vance Walker also sign with the Dallas Cowboys. They did try for Fabian Washington, the cornerback, but he decided that Dallas was not for him. And Dallas is in a very tough division. They were 4th place. But now we'll move to why this division is so tough, the Philadelphia Eagles. So the Eagles only signed 4 players. I mean, at free agency, they only really were able to bring in one main target was Landon Cone at left end, because they lost a good number of players. They lost Cameron Wake. They lost Jarius Wynn, Larry Johnson at running back, Earl Bennett at receiver. They lost David Bruton at free safety, Anthony Waters at middle linebacker. So there's some holes they have on their team here. And so they are able to get Thomas Morstead at punter, Jamon Meredith at left guard, and Fernando Velasco. A lot more of just like roster depth filling for the Eagles. Then, of course, you have the Giants. The Giants bring in Nnamdi Asomugha. And so Asomugha is their only free agent signing. Very strapped for cash. Palmer costs a lot of money. Ryan Matthews, I think, is in his 1-year opt-in. So there's a lot, and there's some defensive players they have that are pulling a lot of salary away. So Nnamdi is the one that's brought in. He's been a veteran. So they add that depth to their defensive backfield. And then the Commanders, they have David Bruton and Roy Miller. They signed both those players on defense to finish up kind of giving some more depth for their defense. Again, Michael Vick costs a lot of money. Vincent Jackson costs a lot of money. So now they're just kind of strapped for cash, so they only have a few free agents available to sign. Now we'll move over to the AFC teams, starting with the AFC West. We have the Denver Broncos making some moves. They still have Sam Bradford, but they bring in Matt Schaub at quarterback. They also have Zach Miller, David Boz, Johnny Jolly, Jason Allen. But the big free agent signing there is Cameron Wake from the Philadelphia Eagles. So that's going to be a good pass rusher for them in the AFC West in a very competitive division. And then they tried for David Bruton at free safety, but he decided not to go to Denver. And that's why Jason Allen was kind of the follow-up pick. Then you have, I know the Chargers and Chiefs are out of order alphabetically, but who cares? The Chiefs, they are able to bring in Brandon Albert, Guy Wimper, Brian Hartline, and they also bring in middle linebacker Jasper Brinkley. So here they get a lot of offensive line help to give Brandon Weeden or whoever ends up being quarterback some more support. Give Trent Richardson another running back or another O-line run blockers to support. But here's the big free agency acquisition. The AFC Championship losers, the Chargers, with Aaron Rodgers, Santonio Holmes, Hester, and all the group, bring in Arian Foster from the San Francisco 49ers. So probably the biggest offensive free agent on the market. Below him would have been Mike Wallace and so forth. So he was the biggest catch. And the San Diego Chargers land one of the best running backs in the league, and that is Arian Foster. They also bring in Mike Mitchell. They bring in Ashley Palmer, and they bring in kicker Nick Novak. More of a kind of a routine thing there. Most of the kickers are very similar. But that was a major signing for the league. Arian Foster going from the Super Bowl winning 49ers to now the San Diego Chargers, who are trying to get that Super Bowl win for Aaron Rodgers, which he has yet to have even a Super Bowl appearance. Then we have Oakland. Oakland bringing in Connor Barwin at left end. They bring in a safety, Darian Stewart. And they have outside linebacker, the old man, Lance Briggs, who was with Baltimore for many years in my franchise. In real life, he was with the Chicago Bears, but in mine, he was with the Ravens so far his entire career up until this point. Then we get to the AFC North, where you see the Bengals bring in Phil Lodeholt. They have Richard Seymour, the veteran defensive lineman, David Bueller. And they tried for Mike Wallace, but Mike Wallace did not go to Cincinnati. Stayed in the NFC with the Cardinals. And then they signed Lewis Murphy, who was the number one wide receiver for the Houston Texans, despite the fact that I felt the Texans' receiving core was garbage. But he still goes to the Bengals to give them some more receiving depth as they lost Terrence Austin. And then you have the Browns, who bring in one of the best defensive ends, Darryl Tapp, best defensive ends in free agency. He was like 78, 79 overall. So he comes to Cleveland. Patrick Turner comes to Cleveland. He was a return man, I believe, for the Bills. Also more of a bigger receiver. And they signed Sean Andrews at right guard. So Andrews used to be with the Ravens his entire career. Now he's in Cleveland for a year. And then Ataba Rubin, I don't know if he re-signs directly, but he was once with the Browns, then he left the Browns, and now he's back with the Browns as a defensive tackle, as Sean Rogers ended up, I believe, either retiring or he just wasn't on the Browns anymore. I think he retired. Then we've got the Ravens. As you can see right there, they have Luis Vasquez. They have Ramon Foster, two inside guards. And then you have the Sebastian Vollmer, who was a Patriot. They lost Zach Strief at left tackle. Strief actually goes to the Patriots, which we'll see in a bit. And then Vollmer from the Patriots goes to the Ravens, so they kind of swapped left tackles. The Ravens signed Donald Brown, which was a weird signing, but they had the cap room to do it. So they have Ray Rice at running back. They lost Rashad Jennings and Justin Forsett and Jason Snelling. And they bring in a backup for Ray Rice, who's like an 84 overall. So they have Ray Rice and Donald Brown. They're going to have some good running attack opportunities, especially with Kaepernick, who did not do as well this past season. Went like 12-5 his first year. Then it was like 5-12 or 6-11 last year. So really rough go for him. They do bring in Captain Munnerlyn as a cornerback. So that's some better defensive depth. They bring in Seth Olson as a offensive center. Kevin Ogletree comes in as a receiver, kind of there to give some more wide receiver depth. And then they kind of needed a better backup, so Matt Moore comes in as the backup quarterback for the Ravens. Then Pittsburgh, they had some significant losses in this free agency period. They lost backup quarterback Derek Anderson. He is the highest rated quarterback in free agency, and he still didn't get a job. But we look at Derek Hagan, Brandon Gibson, receiver, even Kellen Winslow finally left them. Richie Incognito at center, Tamba Hawley, Pariah James, Jason McCourty, Keenan Lewis, just a lot of players that are just gone from this team. But they bring in Clint Session from the Chargers, Doug Dadish at center, Sammy Hill. They signed Jared Cook, who was the best tight end, and they don't even need the tight end. They have Delaney Walker, who's one of the top tight ends in the league. I had to sit there and look through his stats a bit more to see how he compares to other tight ends in my franchise. But he was with the Baltimore Ravens for many years, leaves the Ravens, and now he's going to Pittsburgh to be the backup for Delaney Walker. So Big Ben's going to have two big tight end targets, Walker and Cook. They also have Michael Conan, Aaron Maben at pass rusher, and Kevin Cobb kind of replacing Derek Anderson. Cobb has been sort of a league backup ever since he was drafted. Had very little chances to start and never made the most of it when he did play. Now we've got the AFC East, and here we have the Bills bringing in two centers, Ryan Cook, and the best center in the league, Richie Incognito from Pittsburgh. They also bring in a right guard, Tony Fonoti. They do sign the best outside linebacker in the free agency, DeAndre Levy. Then they signed two linebackers, the veteran Nick Barnett and Nick Bellore. So they're really working on their O-line and their defensive line right there. Then you have the Miami Dolphins, We see them bring in Chris Cooley, who hasn't really been that dynamic as a tight end in this franchise. They also bring in Aaron Petrie. Aaron Petrie was, I believe, the Detroit Lions kicker. Was he? Let me double check. Search where he was before. No, he was with the Panthers. But still, he was a weaker kicker to be considered, but he's there nonetheless. Then the Miami Dolphins bring in Troy Smith from the Cleveland Browns. Smith did not want to stay in Cleveland as a backup, but they have Terrell Pryor and they have Josh Johnson in Cleveland. And since Terrell Pryor is so much like Cam Newton, he had a mobile Josh Johnson behind him and Troy Smith. So Troy Smith comes over to Miami to be the backup for Cam Newton. Then when we look at the Green Bay Packers, they bring in the Packers' Mike Jenkins. And the Packers have a lot of good DB, so that's one reason why they did that. And they also signed Lee Evans, who is an older receiver, and so I'll be surprised if he actually... I'll be surprised if Lee Evans stays on the team. I don't think he is, because he is older. He was with the Chargers last year, but Steve Smith sort of stole his veteran spotlight, where Steve Smith just went crazy. One of the top 10 receiver in yards, top 5 in touchdowns, and that's what Lee Evans was supposed to be for the Chargers, but that's what Steve Smith became. And then they also signed Brandon Myers at tight end, so nothing really spectacular there for the Jets, but just a solid corner, veteran receiver, and then Brandon Myers. And then the Patriots, they tried to bring back Sebastian Vollmer in free agency, but he just was not having it. He did not want to be there. So the Patriots replaced him with Zach Strife from the Baltimore Ravens. I think that was a good kind of consolation prize there. He is still a good starting left tackle, which is what the Patriots wanted to maintain with that left tackle spot. Then the last division in this video is the South, and you see the Colts bring in Leonard Weaver to replace John Kuhn, who was one of the best the best fullbacks in the league. Then Robert James at middle linebacker, and they bring in defensive tackle Gabe Watson. So one of the big things there, they were trying to keep Leon Washington, who had such a great time in the playoffs last year when Chris Johnson went down. They brought back A.J. Jefferson. So really it was more about keeping their team as intact as possible, but they did lose their right guard. They lost their left end, Luis Castillo. And so they lost some players, but they were able to get some depth there with like Gabe Watson and replace Kuhn with Weaver. But as for the Jaguars, the next one up, they also tried for Beanie Wells, but he was not having any of it. But their real success was getting some solid defensive players. So Quentin Demps at free safety was a good addition. You look at Bobby Carpenter, Pittsburgh's Tamba Hawley. Tamba Hawley was very much needed, especially when you look at Pittsburgh having J.J. Watt, and the Steelers also have Elvis Dumervil. They also had Tamba Hawley, and Hawley has now gotten to the point where, even though I like him on Pittsburgh, and he's still, I don't know how many times I got sacked by him when I was playing the game, but Hawley is still good, but he got older, so Pittsburgh let him go, and they have solid replacements for him in Steeltown. But the Jaguars are trying to elevate their team from being the worst to maybe one of the better ones. They do land Fabian Washington, who is coveted by many other teams, so that's a big addition for them. They also have Cedric Pierman at running back. They lost Bernard Scott and Steve Slayton, so they needed somebody as to kind of give them more depth, more of a backup running back. So they're able to, behind DeMarco Murray. And so that was a good addition for them. And then we'll get to the last two teams here, the Houston Texans, and they signed Mark Sanchez. So they had Tavares Jackson, and Jackson kind of gave me the middle finger, didn't want to come back. And then Vince Young also left. So they needed a quarterback despite making the playoffs last year. So they're able to land who probably is the more coveted quarterback. Because like Derek Anderson was there, Tyler Thigpen was there, Tavares Jackson was available in free agency, so forth. But of all the quarterbacks there, the one that looked the best last year was Mark Sanchez, who made the playoffs with the Bears, where, not made the playoffs, but Chicago made the playoffs with Campbell, and then Sanchez came in and won a playoff game, so he looks like he could be a decent starter. So Jeff Fisher brings in Mark Sanchez. They also signed Earl Bennett from the Super Bowl winning Eagles, Chris Clemens, Jason Snelling at fullback, who's more of a fullback running back, and then Mike McGlynn at left guard, and they also bring in a backup, one of my mans, Jeff Smoker. Ever heard of him? Probably not. But he's my journeyman quarterback. Kind of been on many teams as a backup. He normally plays a game a season sometimes due to injury. So Houston's able to get their quarterback room straightened out, going from the run, more mobile quarterback to being more of a pocket team. We'll see if Jeff Fisher is correct in making that change. And then you have the Tennessee Titans, who land Tavares Jackson. And Jackson is becoming one of the best quarterbacks in the 2006 draft class, but has bounced around the league numerous times. And then you have Jordan Gross, the veteran right tackle, Craig Stelz, free safety, Ben Lieber at left outside linebacker. But then you see Brad Smith. Brad Smith was drafted as a quarterback to the Arizona Cardinals and then transitioned to being a receiver. And without changing any of his stats, he became a solid receiver for many years for the Arizona Cardinals, but finally got the boot and now is in the with the Tennessee Titans. A few quick trades that took place. We have Tim Tebow getting traded from the New Orleans Saints to the Buffalo Bills. So Pat Shurmur has decided to move on from the Tim Tebow project after McDaniels was fired, and so Tebow will have a new team starting out. The Minnesota Vikings acquire Marquise Colston from the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs have a lot of older receivers that were very active during Eli Manning's time, but now that Eli Manning is gone, they're now making a change. And then you have the Cleveland Browns, also kind of cherry picking from the Kansas City Chiefs. Roddy White, who's like a year younger, a little bit better overall, or about tied overall, but more upside, I guess, for a year. Browns acquire Roddy White, give up a 5th round pick to acquire him. So thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed this in-depth review of where all these different players went in free agency. We will be having more content coming up in this offseason, like the draft and so forth. So thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like the video, leave a comment if you thought something was neat or you thought something was stupid. Always open to hearing your feedback.